Thank you very much. This session, as you know, is opening up a series, and it's a series that deals with teaching, but starts with the challenge which faces us, and that is, how do we, while we're in the midst of teaching our various courses at whatever level we're teaching at, how do we effect a paradigm shift? How do we begin to transform our instruction and the way that we design it so that our practice is part of what is shifting a paradigm almost 180 degrees? This is a challenge that many of us have been facing for quite a number of years, so it isn't as if it's an impossible circumstance, but I think it does entail that one continues to work under difficult conditions and with some frustrations that hopefully in the future will not be there for teachers and professors who follow us. For example, now, as you begin to demand of students, require of students that they reason, students become frustrated, somewhat confused at the beginning of things because they're not used to it. As one of my frustrated students said to me in a moment of exasperation, "I don't like this kind of thinking. We don't use it in any of my other courses." And with that, if I put myself empathically into the thinking of the student, then this student is perceiving this class which I'm teaching as some eccentric class taught by this very strange person who is asking him to do something that he has never done before, which doesn't make complete sense to them and which is very frustrating and difficult. And this, I think, we have to accept as part of what comes with the turf. We also have to expect that with the paradigm shift, different people will be at different places. Some people will dig in their heels. They won't budge 1 inch out of an old paradigm. And the paradigm will shift in part only because they retire at a certain point in time and they're gone. But while they're there, they're going to fight against it because they're comfortable, satisfied, and deeply involved in a paradigm, so much so that it isn't a paradigm to them, it's reality. You can see something as a paradigm only if you can see another paradigm. You can see a perception as a perception only if you can see an alternative perception. And for many people, it is not a question of shifting a paradigm, it's a question of either accepting reality, which is their view of things, or missing reality, which is any other view of things. But they don't see in their own practice one of more than one options. And there are other reasons as well, which I won't elaborate upon, but I think you see the thrust of it. I want to begin this then, first of all, with a sense, a kind of historical sense of what critical thinking is about. And I want to begin by admitting and pointing out to you that critical thinking is not something new. In fact, on the left-hand side, you can see two words, critical and logic, that both have Greek roots. And on the right-hand side are two words, think and reason, that have Latin roots. And I want to talk just for a moment with you about these roots. The Latin root is tangere, which, according to my dictionary, originally meant something like to know. And so there is in the root of thinking the notion that when we think we know, or thinking is the attempt to know. On the other hand, if we take the Greek root of critical, we find kritikos and criterion in Greece. And kritikos, according to the dictionary, has to do with judging, discerning, having judgment. And criterion has to do with standards and testing. And so if we took just that, we would say, etymologically, critical thinking is thinking which seeks to know by judging with discernment, using standards and tests as a means. And just going this far suggests that in the roots of these words is a very old concept. And we can go a little bit further here because we can take logic and reason, and we find that logic comes from a Greek word logikos, and reason from a Latin word ratio, and both of them meant essentially the same thing, to figure out. To figure out. So that you could say the purpose of logic is to figure something out, and the purpose of reason is to figure something out. Now, both of these words, logic and reason, or logikos and ratio, come from two Indo-European roots. That is, both languages have a common language in the background. In the background, the etymology of logikos goes back to skiri. I don't know if that's properly pronounced, probably not, which means to cut and separate and divide, also to sort. And the root re, according to my dictionary, means to combine, to gather, to synthesize. And so you might say, etymologically, you have one half in the Greek. The Greeks are on the analytic side, and the Latins are on the synthetic side. But each of those roots, then, sheds some light on the nature of what this thinking is doing when it is trying to know. It is trying to reason logically, to use standards and tests to figure out. And if you put all of these together, I think you come pretty close to a reasonable concept of what we now mean by critical thinking. And in that sense, this is nothing new. But in my presentation and in the way I'm approaching this, I'm putting the concept of logic right at the center. And I'm using it in this way, the logic of. Notice the presentation is how to teach students to seek the logic of things. The logic of things. Think for a minute of things, not of our conceptions of things. The logic of the screwdriver, the logic of parenting, the logic of being a child in Chicago in the 30s, the logic of the Depression, the logic of this poem, the logic of the experiment. Each of these expressions, though it might strike you as slightly odd, also comes across as somewhat intuitive. And the reason for that is, if you look up the word logic in the dictionary, so the Oxford English Dictionary especially, you'll see there's a family of related meanings, and underneath these meanings is the notion that everything is logical, can be made logical, or can be assessed through logic. Start with this notion. All we know are ideas. If somehow or another you could strip somebody's ideas away completely, so that they had no ideas whatsoever, presumably they would have no knowledge, nor would they have any experience left. Because we don't experience as humans separate from our ideas. We don't experience a shape undifferentiated. We experience a tree or a cat. You're here experiencing this room, and you're experiencing heat, and you're experiencing lights, and you're experiencing a stage and a person, and this represents a certain meaning in your mind, and you can't experience it with none of those going on, as far as I know. At least I can't. But if all we know are ideas, then we have to notice also that these ideas always work in systems. That is, it is the characteristic of an idea that no idea stands alone. And that to understand any one idea, you have to understand other ideas as well. So if you have to understand what parenting is, then you have to have at least the idea of a child, the idea of birth, the idea of youth, the idea of responsibility, the idea of danger, the idea of nurturing, the idea of, well, many, many other ideas. You simply can't understand the one idea all by itself. It needs the other ideas. Its logic is a part of a bigger system of meanings.